that was messy.
Yeah, sure was, man. Feel like there's a lot that could have gone better.
Yeah, it sure does seem like that. But, we kept our heads level and we managed the best we could. We can't expect everything to go right all the time. Hey, let's take a moment and talk about it. Clinical debriefing is an often overlooked but essential routine procedure that should be carried out by all people involved in stressful jobs. Paramedics, teachers, military personnel, police, the list goes on. In this presentation, I use the Gibbs reflective model to broaden my understanding of debriefing and experiential learning. In my multiple clinical practices, I've been part of debriefing after cases that were high impact or involved sensitive areas of practice. After each case, it seemed almost as if either the paramedics knew what was going on in my mind, or the case seemed to be sitting off with them as well. Specifically, I remember my first cardiac arrest. The CCP pulled all the crews aside that were involved, and we had a chat. This chat seemed to come as a relief to both myself, my mentors, and the other paramedics around. As we debriefed, we talked about both what went well, what could have gone better in terms of clinical, and what the plan was for the patient. The sensations that came over me and continue to come over me during high impact cases continue each time. I remember prior to the case watching my mentors become anxious from the information from the MDT, each giving me instructions about what I needed to do in the order that it had to be done in. This made me feel pretty nervous. On arrival, the patient, it seemed like we each had a role to do and each role had to be done to the best of our ability. The mentors I was with moved quickly and so did I. I could almost describe this feeling as tense, being unable to gauge what would the outcome be. After we had offloaded and given handover, we all stood around the stretcher talking. Each person had a go, and from going from a tense environment, I felt like all that tension had melted away. This was my first real experience with an effective debriefing, and chose to investigate further into the topic in hopes of better understanding the steps, logics, and benefits behind it. In the situation that I was part of, there was both good and bad parts. Being unprepared for my mentor's expectation was a bad aspect, as well as not knowing what the plan would be if we got ROSC and made it to hospital. These two parts of the case probably contributed most to my anxiety and stress. The good elements, though, were that I managed well in that high-intensity situation, as well as having that CCP that knew what to do and how to properly debrief with the crew afterwards, as these two aspects is probably what calmed me down the most after the case. Ultimately, this case has stuck with me due to the fact that I was in a high-impact incident and benefited from a debrief with my mentors and CCP. So, clinical debriefing and experiential learning. Clinical debriefing is a procedure that supports experiential learning, and in order to understand experiential learning, we must also investigate the origins it has formed in the education system that exists in schools, universities, and workforces. As humans, we seem to hopelessly categorize our experiences into negatives or positives, but the schools of thought that have informed the evidence base of this subject argue that all experiences share common ground. They all alter our current views and therefore alter our future performances. And often, the best practitioners are the ones that, through debriefing, can identify these changes and make sure that the positive ones are supported and the negative ones are adapted in their plans for future outcomes. Established theories of education, specifically David Kolb's theory of education, highlights that as human beings, every single one of us is different. And in hopes of educating the masses, teaching has to be varied in order to accommodate for our individual understanding. Kolb explains there are two major styles. These are passive and active. Passive styles can be lectures, videos, discussions, whereas active includes experiments, outdoor education, hands-on practice. Having varied styles of learning ensures students have the greatest advantage in understanding, but each is unique in what it offers. Passive may have decreased retention of knowledge, but increased information load, whereas active is likely to improve retention, but can be time-consuming and resource-intensive. Consider IV cannulation as an example. As theory would have it, you put on a tourniquet, you pump the hand, you find the vein and cannulate at a 45-degree angle. Once flashback has occurred, straighten up, insert the cannula. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. But any person attempting their first cannulation would probably say it's difficult, lemon, difficult. There are factors not present in the passive learning style, there are in the active learning style. This includes such things as roll of mains, improper cannula size, what if the person's unconscious without a good cardiac output. It is due to this fact that the experimental phase of learning that surrounds both schools and university teaching exists. Learning the theory informs our practice, our knowledge creates an expectation, and then doing the skill and reflecting on what that has met and fell below our expectation prepares us for the phase in which we put that skill into practice. So the next important step into understanding the essence of clinical debriefing is understanding how experiential learning informs our behaviours and practices. Experiential learning is a person's ability to learn from past experiences. Kolb formalised this process by introducing reflection, explaining that our experiences inform our subconscious thoughts and actions, but in making yourself conscious and practicing self-reflection and peer reflection, people are able to identify positive and negative more quickly and adjust consciously. Kolb also makes the point that the active styles of learning should simulate experiential learning, much like our OSCEs do. That as something is experienced, one should, following the experience, observe what happened, reflect on how the process occurred, and plan for how the process can be improved. This cycle of experiential learning is very prominent in nursing model of care of ADPI, assess, diagnose, plan, implement, and evaluate, and is therefore used as the most effective clinical planning model. At this point, we've probably reached what is considered the basis for how curriculums in schools and university should be taught. That is, education should be delivered in varied styles, including passive or theory-based learning, active or practical-based learning. Furthermore, when conducting active styles of learning, a process of reflection should also occur. This makes a student self-aware and conscious of strengths and weaknesses and how you could improve these in the future. So what happens when you leave education and work in the real world? How do you evaluate yourself and how do you plan for the future when it's not either mandatory or structured? Clinical debriefing is the term that is widely used in the medical field to describe the process that occurs after a simulation or HIPAC incident, in which health professionals reflect on the event and identify areas of strength and areas of improvement, as well as gauging the emotional response from their peers. The two areas that debriefs have formed the greatest effect is debriefing after simulations for health professionals and students, and further in multidisciplinary teams in the clinical setting. The basic structure of a debrief, or in this case we've used the debrief diamond, is description, what occurred step by step, analysis, how did everyone feel, what went well, why and why not, investigation, what skill or decision led to this outcome, and application, what is the plan for the next time. Numerous studies have found that students gain a tremendous amount of insight into their reactions and performances when they observe themselves in the debrief following simulations. One journal article by Dried Furist, 2009, specifically insights the fact that it is more about understanding why they reacted the way they did, rather than cast blame or point out weakness. One nursing article outlines that having an experienced tutor or nurse guide the debriefing invites open discussion. This same article outlined that when a student and team leader of simulations reflected on their performance, their ability to analyze decisions and skills applied was above average and performed better on following simulations. It is clear that simulations, although being far from the real world, can create meaningful experiences that students can draw from. On the flip side though, when multidisciplinary teams conducted debriefs in clinical settings, many stated that they gained little knowledge and would react the same way as they did in the scenario they had just observed, and would be unlikely to use debriefing for every situation. Although, in another study conducted in Canada, a positively enforced debriefing regime resulted in improved mood staff, greater confidence in peers, and quicker interventions. The researchers concluded that staff improvements occur when team understands their role and the compensations are made in terms of extra training or better resources, indicating that there may be a negative culture around debriefing and improvement is there to happen. Clinical debriefing is usually also strictly a shared experience, but there may be cases where individuals reflect on their own performance, also known as a clinical reflection. A study in Sweden found that students on practicum that reflected on cases that existed out of their expertise had a minor improvement in future practicums over students that decided not to self-reflect. Additionally, many services internationally and nationally have begun to positively enforce debriefing, like QAS's Priority 1, using skilled counsellors to follow up paramedics on difficult cases, as well as having peer support leaders programs that give paramedics a person to talk to closer to their network. An international study found that emergency services are at the highest risk of developing PTSD, and a psychological journal found that peer-based discussion can solely improve stress disorder fallout in 55% of cases. In conclusion, debriefing and more broadly experiential learning are processes that continue to be continuously developed by schools, universities, and health services. Through experimental learning and further into simulations, but still have a way to come in terms of being positively reinforced in workforces. There are numerous benefits to debriefing beyond just clinical performance, from allowing health professionals to become self-aware of areas of improvement, to building greater teamwork amongst health workers and improve the emotional response of paramedics to traumatic incidences to ensure their career is extended as far as it can. In forming my action plan for the future, I have learned that the number one step that can be taken to benefit myself and the peers in my network is to actively partake in debriefing and positively reinforce debriefing tools by accessing them, making sure there's no stigma built around it, and making sure that I'm initiating through peer support networks within the actual service. Ultimately, grassroots debriefing and ensuring I am constantly learning from my experiences is the best way I can create a positive change in my early stages of a paramedic career. In seniority though, ensuring that I'm confident and willing to lead debriefing when I see fit will likely save both myself, my peers, and the students that may be too afraid to speak up in high-impact incidences.